Hi, so I'm Tamsin and welcome to my home. I've set up a little studio at my dining room table today and I'm really excited to be part of this series. So thank you so much to everyone for tuning in today. And so we're going to make some rainbows and we're only going to be using 3 colors plus some white. So I will be touching on a little bit of color theory through that process. And although I've been painting for many years, I've found that my journey into getting to know the color spectrum through paint, it's really an ongoing journey and that keeps revealing new things. And I still feel like I have so much more to learn. But I wanted to share 2 aspects about color or color theory that I think are really exciting and amazing, and they have really helped me find my way into color when it comes to choosing which to work with and how to mix them. So the first is about color temperatures, that is warmer and cooler tones, and we're going to explore this by making a rainbow using 3 primary colors to mix the colors in between. But I'll be demonstrating with examples of what are known of as cold primary colors, and I'll talk about this later. We'll also, in this exercise, we're also going to learn how to mix a really beautiful neutral gray from those same 3 colors. And then for the next exercise, I want to see how many more colors we can make from the 6 used in the rainbow. So we'll be doing another exercise exploring how many hues we can make from the 6 in the rainbow. And in this one, we'll be looking at mixing complementary opposite colors, which I'll also explain in more detail later. But for example, blue to orange, yellow to purple, which can seem a bit counterintuitive and crazy, but it works beautifully. And that should leave us a bit of time for you then to have more of a freestyle exercise where you can explore some of the ideas that we've looked at together, but maybe bringing your own ideas into it. So what are you going to need? First of all, some paint. So I'm working with acrylics today, but you could do this exercise with any kinds of paint, watercolor, for example. And as mentioned, I'm going to demonstrate with quite specific colors today. I've got 3 primary colors which are considered as colder. So I have cobalt blue, magenta, lemon yellow, and we'll also need some white. So if you have these and you want to join in, follow along with what I'm doing precisely, you can use these colors. But if you have other colors, please feel free to use whatever you have to hand and to experiment with those. You can absolutely still participate and see what comes out with what you have. And then we'll need some paper, any size really, but ideally at least 1A3. But also, again, don't worry if you don't have that. And ideally some thick watercolor paper or thick cartridge, but again, whatever you have to hand is fine. You can do these exercises with a tiny scrap of paper, it doesn't matter. 2 brushes, a clean sponge, 2 cups of water. One you'll be using to clean your brush, the other you'll be using to dip in. Then some kitchen towel or rag, and a palette or plate. So ideally a flat palette or plate, but again, whatever you have is just fine. And also just to mention, of paints do vary across brands and across types, so definitely don't worry too much when you can't get the precise colors. I mean, when I was preparing for this and wanting to top up on magenta, like 1,000 variations came up online. So yeah, you get hues and all kinds of things. So yeah, don't worry too much about the precision on that. And I think that's it, so we can begin. I've actually also got top up water because I can't get to the sink and somewhere to pour dirty water, but hopefully you all have access to topping up if you need. So let's start by making a rainbow. So you've got your 3 colors, and we're going to put, I'm going to use a plate for this one because I quite like the round shape for this exercise. I'm going to put, so I'm going to put 3 blobs of each color because we'll be mixing across them. It just means you can keep one clean for each mix. Oh, I've forgotten a whole section. Sorry, I need to tell you about the hot and cold colors. So I hope you guys haven't started yet, but don't worry if you have, you can just leave that to the side for one moment. And I need to tell you just a little bit of basic about color mixing before we get into the making. So here we have what are known of as the 3 primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. And these can be used to mix secondary colors. For example, red and blue make purple, blue and yellow mixed together make green, and red and yellow together make orange. And earlier on, I mentioned about color temperatures. And in this image, it's quite easy to say that the reds, orange, and yellows are warmer tones, and the blues and greens and maybe the purple could easily be considered as cooler temperatures. But there's also a subtler way of looking at color temperature, and that is that across the variations of primary colors that are out there, some of them could be considered relatively colder or relatively hotter. So I've made this little poster to demonstrate, but you definitely don't have to take it all in. It's just, I think it's quite nice to know that it exists and that you can refer to it. And I'll explain a bit more. So the hot primaries, you might say that the blue is a little bit warmer compared to these cooler blues. You could say it has perhaps a little bit more red in it. And by contrast, the cool primaries, these reds perhaps have a little more blue in them. So this magenta is considered a little bit cooler than this cadmium red. So that's how the primaries are defined into warmer primaries and colder primaries. So here, and so primary colors are just variations of this red, yellow, and blue, but they're very pure colors. And it means that you can mix across these colors, and in a way, in theory, your palette should stay quite clean and the colors shouldn't get too muddy. So you might decide to make a painting using only the cold primaries or only the warm primaries. And with that, you might find you get sort of harmony across the whole palette by using only those 3 colors and what they mix in between. But there are no rules, and you can mix across both these hot primaries and cold primaries. And however you mix things, you're going to get different results. So, for example, here I've mixed, and I hope the colors translate across Zoom, but in this one, I've mixed a hot yellow and a hot blue to get this green. And in this one, I've mixed cool yellow and a cool blue to get that green. And you can see that they're really quite different. This one's a lot more olivey, and that one's a sort of brighter apple green. So that's just one example of mixing from the different cool and warm primary colors. And there are many exercises out there, like very complex color wheels, where you can mix all those variations, and it's really wonderful to do those if you have the time. But I've been doing a fun exercise in my studio, which is really quick and fun, and it's a way of taking a selection of 3 colors, putting them together and seeing what they might do together, because it can be really overwhelming to choose which blues to work with for a painting, or which yellows. So I've had fun kind of getting to know how they play off one another and how they mix together by doing these little rainbow color studies. So now we can get back to the making. Give you all a chance to get your things together. So yeah, so our three colors are our white, and we're going to start by putting, so we're going to use these colors to make our rainbow of 6 colors. So a little blob of each. I'll even put some white in the middle already. Then the next thing I'm going to do is actually wet my paper. And you absolutely don't have to do this, but I quite like doing it because wetting it first means that the colors bleed into one another a little bit more and you get some nice surprises out of it. So I'm going to use right now just an A4 watercolor. And the reason I'm using watercolor paper is because I'm wetting it, so it's going to just hold up to the water a little better, but you can wet any paper and see what happens. And you can do this in any size, but I'm doing A4. I quite like it being a bit smaller for this. So I'm gonna wet my sponge. You could also use rag if you have it. I'm going to be quite generous with the water. Might even do both sides so that it, blob of yellow there already, holds up. And then we're going to begin painting and mixing the colors. So I'm going to start with yellow. I find when you're color mixing, yellow is one of the first colors to get really muddled up. And that doesn't matter when you're making a work, but I feel like seeing what the really clean color is here. So actually I'm going to start with my middle blob. And I'm going to paint a classical rainbow shape, but you could make this study, you could do it any shape you like really. You could do the colors in a circle or in lines, or just join me on a rainbow if you want to, which in itself can take on so many forms. So doing yellow stripe there. And as I mentioned before, use 1 cup for washing your brush and 1 for dipping. So this will be my dipping cup. So I want a bit more water. Get a lovely yellow stripe there. You can see how the paint is spreading out a little bit into the paper. Now I'm going to move on to my second color. So I'm going to go yellow into blue, which will give us green. So I've got my yellow blob there. And when mixing 2 colors together, a good rule of thumb is to take a tiny drop of the darker color and put that into the lighter color, or the less strong color, because had I been mixing the yellow into the blue, it might just vanish because the blue is much darker. So a tiny drop of blue into the yellow gives us a green. Dip my brush in my dipping cup. Here we go with green. And then I'm going to move over, mix a bit more blue in. Ended up with a slightly darker green here. Something in between. And then I'm going to go for the blue in its pure form. So I'm going to rinse my brush here, but you don't really have to with this exercise because you're flowing around with the colors. But now I've got pure blue, cobalt blue, because I want to see what that looks like in my palette. There we go. And then from there, I keep going around my plate and need a bit of blue. And I think the magenta might be more powerful. I'm not sure, but I'm going to mix magenta into the blue. So with the blue and magenta or red that you have, that should give you a purple. Dip my brush in the clean water. Lovely, still quite bluish, so I'm going to add some more magenta to get a purplish shade there. My rainbow's going off the page. And then I'm going to clean my brush a bit. And come around to the magenta, red, do a little stripe in there. Now, coming back down to the yellow, I need to mix a bit of yellow and magenta to get orange. So again, try and take a tiny drop of the magenta and mix it into the yellow first, because it's weaker. There you have an orange made from lemon yellow and magenta. I might even wet my page a little bit more here, and then, so I'm going to do another magenta stripe on the end. And there you have, I don't know if you can see it bleeding in. Oh, I didn't like this. So the last stripe I've done, the paper was wetter, so it's bleeding more, which I think is quite interesting. So there you have, from the 3 colors, we've made 6 colors. And now I get to almost the best part, which is from these 3 cool primary colors, we can mix a really beautiful, clean, neutral gray. So I'm going to take a drop of each, yellow, probably more yellow because it's weaker, tiny bit of blue, tiny bit of magenta. Mix these all together. You get kind of browny mixture here. And add a touch of white. So, as I mentioned, because these are all cool colors, it means when you mix this gray, they stay in the same kind of harmony. And you'll find with the gray, depending how much of each color you put, it might be a little bit more green or a bit red or a bit blue, and you can keep mixing until you get a gray that you're happy with, or you might decide to use a slightly greener gray. So my gray is quite green, so I'm going to add a touch more of the pink. That looks good. And I find mixing, if I am making a work with certain colors, towards the end, I might mix some variations of gray, and it means it's a wonderful way of kind of grounding the other colors, finding some beautiful neutral colors without having to add more to your palette, and also using up all the paint that you have left over. So I'm going to paint this gray around my rainbow. So it's quite greeny, but I really like it. Just to give it a kind of backdrop. I'm going to add a touch more orange into the gray, and you get it a bit yellower. And I might even add a bit more blue to my gray. I mean, if you keep going and you're like quite disciplined about it, you can find a gray that really is gray. It's called middle chromatic gray, and it has an equal balance, these colors, so they don't veer to one way or the other, but I think they're all quite lovely. There we go. So that is our rainbow with made from the 3 colors, and also the lovely gray that we've made from them. Mine's kind of shooting off the page, it's a bit mad. But I wanted to say as well, while you're making your rainbow, you can also think about what rainbows mean to you. And I think I can only imagine that they've always caught our imagination since the beginning of time as something quite magical in the sky, and maybe representation of hope and possibility and magic. And it's also meant as a symbol, it's meant different things to different people over time. And obviously right now it's become this beautiful symbol of hope and gratitude for workers on the front line during COVID. And other examples could be the 6-stripe rainbow of the global LGBTQ pride movement, or where I grew up in South Africa, after our first democratic elections, when apartheid ended in the 90s, we became known as the Rainbow Nation, to mean equality between all races. But yeah, so those are all beautiful meanings for it, but you might also have a personal meaning for a rainbow. And so you can think about that when you're making them, and even design it into your shape. Oh. My overhead's gone blank. I think a call's coming through, sorry. I'll ignore it and hopefully it comes back. Oh, decline. Continue. Oh, we're back, good. Great, so as I mentioned, now we've explored what you can make with the 3 colors into 6 quite bold. I didn't mention, so this, as we spoke about temperatures, this is an example of a rainbow made with cooler temperatures. And I have cooler primaries. Don't know if you'll be able to see, they're all so intense, but this one on the right was made with hot primaries. So you can see the yellow is a bit warmer, the blue is maybe a bit darker. And as a result, the colors in between are different. Here you can see it more distinctly because I've used a lighter magenta and also a different cool blue, which is cerulean. So you can see it more distinctly here, that this rainbow you might think of as hotter in color temperatures than this one. Yeah, so that's the first exercise. And then, I don't know how everyone's doing over there, if I'm going too quickly or too slowly, but I will, since we have limited time, I will move on to the next exercise, and you can always come back to the rainbows. So as I was saying, I want to see how many more colors we can make from those 6. And like, although this gives you an idea of what they can mix, in a way the colors are all still very vivid and pure, they're quite bright. So it's, obviously the more you mix those colors, the more will come out as well, and you might get some subtler tones in between those. So the next exercise we're going to be doing is this one. So how would we make more colors from those 6? One way of doing it could be making each color lighter or darker. So you could take some white paint and mix in more and more white paint until the color becomes lighter and lighter. You could make the paint darker, and one way of doing that might be to add some black, but the more black you add to the color, the more gray and dirty it's going to become. So what I'll show you now is a beautiful way of muting a color slightly, but still keeping it clean and wonderful. And the way that we do that, I'll come back to this one. So the way of muting a color is by mixing what is the opposite color. So the opposite of blue would be orange because it has the other 2 primaries in it, but no blue. And the opposite of red is going to be green because it has these 2 primaries in it, but no red. And the opposite of purple is yellow because purple has these two primaries in it, but no yellow. So these are known as the complementary opposites, in that they complete the circle, being made of the two primaries, which aren't in here. So don't worry if that, you don't have to take that all in, because I'll guide you through it. But we'll be mixing, as you can see here, from yellow to its complementary opposite, purple, and we'll see all the colors that come between. And likewise with this pair and with the blue to orange. And while we're doing this exercise, you could, if you're working more slowly today, you might decide just to mix one pair. You might only mix blue to orange. I'll mix through all three pairs if there's time, but just work at your own pace. And yeah, if you prefer to do just one combination, of course, that's absolutely fine. So before starting the next exercise, the first thing that we need is really clean palette and really clean brushes. There's times where you can be more casual about your brush. Like, I don't like to think too much about cleaning my brush or being careful when I'm painting. I like to work quite freely without thinking about it. And in a way, that's why I've started restricting myself to only a limited range of colors. It means that I can paint without thinking, so I can keep coming back to this palette and let the colors mix and bleed, and it doesn't matter. But sometimes if you really want to see what colors can do, it's worth cleaning your brushes really well. I've put in the wrong one. So in your cleaning pot, and then make sure you've got all the paint out from the bottom there. If you're working on a plate, you'll need to clean it now as well. So just clean your plate nicely. I'm actually going to, for this exercise, I'm going to use a slightly bigger palette, but yeah, you can use whatever you have. So I have a clean palette, clean brushes. You might even want to change your water. You don't have to, but I think I will. Put it on the sink. I'm going to put mine there, fresh water. Okay, so now you need your A3 page. Any size is fine, but because it's more to mix, slightly bigger might be helpful. And so let's start with the complementary pairs of blue. And what was its opposite color again? Is orange. So we need to mix our own orange now. If you had orange, you could use it, but because we're trying to see what we can do just with three colors, we'll stick with this. So now put a blob of blue here, and then at a distance, we need to mix our own orange. I've got my red and yellow to make orange. I'm going to put a bit more yellow because it's a lighter color. Blob of clean water. So you have blue and you need your opposite color. So again, we come back to mixing. Keep going until it's all used up. See, if I'd had some blue stuck in my brush, for instance, it would just spill out at this point and make my orange really grubby too early. Right now, I want to work with really clean colors while I'm doing this. So in fact, I might say I probably did leave some in there. Anyway, it looks good enough to me. Bit of extra water and start with my, I'm going to do my color tests as these blobs. It's just how I'm doing them right now, but you could do any shape. And I'm going to do blue blob on the other side so I know where I'm going. Cobalt blue. Now, oh sorry, so I used my second brush for that blob to keep it nice and clean easily. Now, again, as I mentioned before, we'll go from one side to the other, but I'm going to mix the blue in because it's a slightly stronger color. So you have your orange on one side and start really small because you're going to do a whole range of shades in between here. So I'm just going to put a really tiny bit, oh, it's even too much. I just want to subtly, oh, this brush, my rag is dirty, so it's making a mess. I want to subtly change this orange. I want to keep it orange, but just add a touch of the blue so that it becomes a bit more interesting. It's almost more, you know what? There we go. I should have used my orange brush for that, not the blue brush, because it's been spilling in. But anyway, get the idea. So, in fact, I'm going to do that. So, the reason for two brushes. Coming back to my one covered in orange paint. I want to keep it quite orangey for now. So you can see it's still an orange, but it's become a little bit more kind of goldeny, greeny ochre. Glad I swapped brushes. And let's see what happens if we add a touch more. Becoming a bit more green. So I suggested cartridge paper for this because I didn't wet the paper first, so it wasn't necessary to have the watercolor, but whatever you have. So I think that's a really lovely green that's come out. It's really olivey and interesting. Add a touch more blue. So slowly we're creeping over to the blue. Still very much in the green. Well, it's gone from orange to kind of greens, and we'll now start turning more towards bluey greens. I haven't left myself enough room because there's still quite a few shades that you could do, and in a way you could take this through and work really, really slowly and have an infinite number of shades in between. I've probably got room for one or two more, so I'm going to get enough blue in there. I'm going to squeak two in. That's become a bit bluer. Again, that's a really beautiful colour, I think. It's become a kind of teal shade over there. And one more. So the last colour would be, if you could imagine, it would be blue with just a touch of orange. So a blue, but a slightly muted one. Or cobalt blue, but slightly muted. There we go. Squeaking my egg in between. So you can see all the hues that you've made between the blue and the orange, and some of these colors are really beautiful, like an ochre, the olivey green coming into the teals here. So even with two colors, if you don't have three, you could create a whole composition using only those two colors. And again, with white, that would change the spectrum also, or change the range of it. So I'm going to work really quickly through the last two, just because of time, but work at your own pace, so that we have time to do one last exercise at the end. But I'm basically going to whiz through these. Does that sound good, guys? Natalie? How's the timing?
Yep, that sounds fine. So we've got, it's 2 to 3 now. So I guess it would be lovely just to see those other two lines. And then, and if anyone has any questions, Tamsin, feel free to pop them in the Q&A, and Louis and I will endeavour to answer them as best we can.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go through these at a blitz. Let's see what we can do. So next primary colour, your red, or in my case magenta, and the other colours to make its opposite, green. Try for a cleaner brush this time. A little bit of blue in there. You also want to mix enough that you don't run out halfway through of your mixed colour. It can happen as well. I sometimes get muddled up. So green is our opposite of red. That looks like a good enough green. I'm going to put that down here. And take my other clean brush, my red, or my cool red, my magenta that I have today, that side. And I think I'm going to work, I think because the green's stronger, I'm going to work from red back to green actually. So that means taking my red brush and getting just a tiny bit of green into it. So that is interesting because it's gone from a really vivid, bright, pinky red to a slightly dustier colour. Lovely dusty magenta over there. What happens if we add a touch more green? Getting dustier and dustier. At some point, it should really become a kind of grey or brown tone because you have all three colours in it, but depends on how you've mixed your green in the first place. But again, that's just a really beautiful neutral tone. So if you were working with these three colours in a painting, you can create these neutral tones that work really well with the bolder colours. More green. And at some point it shifts over to the other colour range. More green. And the last one where you want the green, essentially just with a touch of the magenta. These have gone a bit funny in the end, but you get the idea. Some really nice army greens here. Okay, and then the last combination, super quick. Yellow with its opposites made by a tiny bit of blue, a tiny bit of magenta. In your brush. If you don't have space on your palette for all three, then, and you have the time, it's really worth cleaning your palette in between as well. And last rinse. Okay, so mixing purple, darker color into the lighter. Don't want to run out, so I'm going to make a bit more. It's always good when you're putting paint down to kind of start small because it's easier to add more than take it away. Okay, so we have purple and yellow. Palette from the 80s. What's that? Purple comes down.
So Tamsin, we've had a question,
Mm-hmm.
which is, do you generally decide on the colours for a painting before you start the painting?
Yeah, I do start with a sort of intention, and things can definitely evolve from that. But actually recently, because I'm so obsessed by these hot, cool primaries, and I've been trying to understand them better, for a long time, I would start actually just using the cold primary colors. And now, while I'm trying to understand it, is how I arrange my paint. So I put my cold primaries together, my warm primaries together, and then elsewhere in my other neutral shades, like I use a lot of Payne's Gray, it's quite dark, and whites and things. And so at the moment, it's what I'm into. I'll start with either the cooler sort of range or the hot. And then from there, and it also depends on your subject matter. Like I was doing some irises recently where they have, some blue irises have that wonderful orangey yellow in the middle. So I've actually specifically used the hot blue ultramarine, French ultramarine. It's really a purpley blue, makes a beautiful green and a beautiful purple. So I've been using that, the hot yellow and the hot blue for that, for that iris series. Yeah, so I do start with the range. The other good thing is to really keep it limited. Well, for myself, I find I get a bit overwhelmed if there's too much. So I begin to work with a really limited range and maybe work with that till almost the very end. I might even just work with yellow and blue towards the very end, and then decide, okay, I want to put a really bright pink in here, or what colors do the composition need? Yeah. Any other questions, do shoot, and I'll talk less through this one. Now you know what to do.
We've had a comment from one of the units joining us from London, Tamsin, saying that they love the overlap of art and science.
Ah, great. Well, thank you. So again, gorgeous, slightly greeny, interesting yellow over there, having added purple. Yeah, it's true. It's like sometimes you want to be really free when you work and not think about any of these things. And other times it's really fun to experiment and see what your materials and tools are, what their whole spectrum is and what they're capable of. And then from there you take it back to your creativity. Oops.
So we've been running for about 45 minutes now. If you are able to stay with us, Tamsin's going to be leading one more exercise until around 3 o'clock. If you have to leave, then thank you so much for joining us. But yes, we're going to carry on with one more exercise until about 3 o'clock.
Yes, thanks to everyone who has to go, and sorry to run a little slower than the original program. Okay, so that's a whole other range of colors. And when I'm doing this, I like to do this gray border around it. I'm not going to do it now, but you can see here, for me, it just gives the eggs a little home. But you can do that. And I wanted to show you as well, the other day I did one where I took this palette and added a little bit of white to all the colors and did a subtler version from the same colors. So you can see they're your really vivid ones that we've made, but you can take it a step further and get into a whole lot of lighter colors as well. And the other thing is, I noticed even with the cool ones, I changed, you know, the two cool primary colors. I swapped out one of them, this cobalt for cerulean the other day, and everything, all these came out quite different, the middle tone. So just the change of one color in your trio, I found them much bluer and more purpley in a way. Whereas when I used the other blue, the tones came out a little bit browner. So yeah, I really encourage you to keep experimenting. And although it's a lot of information I've shared today, like maybe there's just one thing that you find makes sense to you and you work with that for a while, and then you could come back to the video even, or other color theory references years from now. I mean, as I say, I worked with these 3 cool colors for a long time, and then slowly I'm making friends with the others. So I'll quickly share the third exercise. It's still wet. Which is basically I just wanted to encourage you to play quite freely with these ideas. And I also wanted to show you on a different paper. This is because obviously a lot of different things happen with what paint you decide to use, but also different things happen on different paper surfaces. So this is one I've been using recently, which is, it's a watercolor paper, but it's handmade and it's cotton. So a lot of examples that I had up here were of that paper. And yeah, basically for the third exercise is to take any aspect of what we've covered today and then have a chance to do your own thing with it. So if you have more colors with you, you might want to see, okay, if you've done a cold rainbow now, you might want to try doing a hot one, or maybe you've come across a few colors in this exercise that you really like, perhaps like that beautiful green and teal and another color there. You could now invent your own rainbow selection from your favorite colors that you've made today, or from your all-time favorite colors, excluding any of these, or to make a rainbow in an entirely different shape. I've got some other examples up here. I did some lines just experimenting with the paints that I had on my palette after working with those 3. I started doing these color balls, again, just taking what was left on my palette. This rainbow I made with some of my other favorite colors, which is Payne's Gray I often use, lemon yellow, and a neon orangey red there. So that was interesting to see what came out of that. This little rainbow, that was made with the 3 colors I've used today, but picking up from some of the tones that had come out of my palette. So there's just a sort of purple, green, and limey green there. So I'll whiz through one since we're still here. What is the time?
It's 7 minutes to 3.
So we've got 5 minutes to do a last one. Okay. So I'm going to wet the page. Also, even after you've been painting for a while, it's a nice way of using up your palette, seeing what's come out. And what am I going to do? I think I really like this teal that's come out. So I might make another rainbow using that as one color. Sometimes, if it's very wet and you don't have much pigment, it becomes quite faded, which can be fine, but I want it to be a bit more juicy, so I'm adding again. So, lovely teal there. And I also really like this dusty pink that came out. I'm going in for that. And I'm just going to choose one more color on my palette. maybe I quite like the yellow when it had just a touch of the purple in it. Do that. My last rainbow stripe. So this has a whole different feeling to the one we did here, to me anyway, because we've gone into more of the subtler tones. And then I'm going to get some white and mix a bit of grey. Yeah, so it's a really fun way to use up your palette. The lovely last grey has come out here. It's a bit more neutral than what I did earlier. Are there any more questions while we've got a few more minutes? Don't be shy.
We've had actually a question more about your working process a little bit. About whether it's been hard to get your art done after your baby was born.
Yeah, big time. I did a couple of drawings of her when she was tiny when I could, but I didn't make much work for a long time. And then I started, as a way of like slowly getting back into it, earlier in the year, I started making, actually I have some here, but I made these started on these tiny canvases. So my idea was to try and see what I could do during a nap, which it doesn't come around often that you even have time during a nap, because mostly you want to, I don't know, tidy the house or something. But I left it set up, and I managed to make a couple during naps. So it was just, I wanted to get back to canvas, which I usually do at the studio and couldn't really do at home, and that really felt like painting. And then the other thing I've done is I've started to find materials that can be resolved in a shorter time frame. So I'm working a lot more on paper and with watercolor in a way that I hadn't before.
Yeah.
Previously, I also do a lot of printmaking, but that takes a couple of days really, or larger canvases.
Following on from that, Tamsin, we've had a question about where can people see your work?
Well, I have a website, which is what do you call it when you overtook the whole thing and it crashed? So it's back up, but it's got some weird glitches and I haven't been able to update it in the last few months. But yeah, you'll see a lot of work on my website. I don't have any shows coming up as such. I think I have some prints I have a print in the Woolwich Print Fair. And Instagram as well is probably the most updated at the moment. Yeah.
So is that tamsinrelly.com?
Yes, exactly. And yeah, also, yeah, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions, or I have a mailing list also on the website where I send news of exhibitions coming out or projects. Or hang on, I used to send news before having a baby. I don't think I've done a newsletter in over a year, but one day. So that's my final rainbow experiment. It's come out all pastel. Another thing you can do on this wet paper is sort of flick things. Yeah, so all of these things were just to share that you can take these ideas into other compositions. And I know that I imagine for some of you out there, you'll have come across a lot of this before. And for others, it might all be new to you, but I hope that either way, it will have sparked some new ideas and inspiration.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tamsin. It's been really fun, and it's, like you say, it's amazing what you can create out of just such 3 basic elements.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. I'll just spotlight.
Pleasure.
So we're going to wrap up for today, and you might know that today was actually meant to be the last session, but we're extending the art school for another 7 weeks. So if you go back onto the Eventbrite page, there are 7 more sessions to sign up for. The next one is with Nicola Beeling next week, and she's doing a sea painting workshop, so that should be really fun. As I mentioned at the start, there is a survey that will come up when you leave the room, and we'd be so grateful if you could fill it out. And you'll also be receiving later details of our art swap. So like I said, you send in artwork to us and we send you artwork for someone else. So everyone gets to share in each other's kind of creative practice. So thank you so much, Tamsin. That was wonderful. Really enjoyed it. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And hopefully we will see you next Thursday at 2 p.m. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.